What's up, everybody? I'm gonna try something a little different tonight. I've spent my entire life talking to people in statistics, facts, cited sources, and all that. And what I found is that, very rarely, very rarely does being presented with the truth um, change anybody's opinion, right? And now scientists like to call that some version of bias, or I can't remember what they call it, but basically, when presented with the truth, people become more entrenched in what they believe, right? Now you could say, okay, that's how people work, cool, right? Nothing we can do about that. But what I think is that perhaps it means is that there's something wrong with the story, right? And you can disagree with it, you can try to disagree with it, but people live in stories. They don't act out what would logically be true, right? Like what they should logically do. They act out what the story they're living is, right? So when I was in the military, right, a kid would show up late to work, and you'd be like, dude, why the fuck are you late? And they'd be like, you didn't care that Bob was late yesterday, but you care that I'm late. Why are you being mean to me? And it's like, well, A, I didn't know that Bob was late yesterday. B, you shouldn't have got caught. And C, you shouldn't tattletale. Snitches get stitches. And D, it doesn't change the fact that you were late to work. You knew the rules, he knew the rules, he got away with it one day, you didn't get away with it. I didn't notice that he was fucking late, I noticed that you were fucking late. What's going on? But they have a story about it in their head about that they're right, they're being victimized, that they're not being held to the same standard as everybody else, and da-da-da-da, right? And when you lay it out in front of them, and you go well, A, I didn't know that, B, blah, 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 all that, doesn't matter. It doesn't change their opinion of you as their supervisor for enforcing the rules as they lay before them. They believe in their story. The story is that they are being uniquely targeted for decimation, so to speak, right? I could lay out all the facts in the world before them. It wouldn't change their opinion that they were getting screwed over somehow, right? When people feel like things are unfair, they just feel like things are unfair, and that's the story they tell themselves. That's the story they tell their friends when they're not at work. It's just the way people are. People live in a story about how things are. Maybe your girlfriend or your spouse tells you stories about her friends and about how evil this friend is, or how she does this and that and the other thing, and she can't fucking stand it. And it's that's not the whole truth, and you know it, but you just go, okay, honey, that's okay. That's part of it. But I think when you recognize that we each are living in a story, and then in each of our individual interactions, we apply a story, we overlay it, one of those transparencies the teachers used to use. They put the light on it, and it would post up on the wall, and then they could write on it, and people overlay a transparency of what's happening, what's actually happening, over what's happening. Does that make sense? What they do is a story is more memorable. So when people feel like they're getting screwed over, they try to apply a story that they can understand to it to make it make sense, because when things are going wrong, we need a story to guide us, right? And that just seems to be the way people are, right? Facts and statistics and all that shit doesn't seem to matter, right? Because, okay, the world isn't as unfair as everybody's fucking currently pretending it is. If you're in America, you are in the top 1% of income earners in the world. The poorest homeless person you ever met makes more money than most people in the world. And by makes, I mean they acquire it. I don't know how they make it, don't know what they do, legal or illegal, but they have more money day to day than the average person in the world outside of America. So to live in America is to live in a certain form of a bubble. Like we live in a special place of humanity where more than actually everybody has more than everybody else outside of America. Okay? So that's why when you are like in the Taco Bell drive-thru, you'll see a homeless person on like a fucking iPhone 15, right? You'll, and they're miserable. Like they're like, life's unfair, and it's like, it is unfair. Life, like fares have rides and shit, and fare is what you pay to get on the bus. But like it's, life isn't fair. like that. There's never been a rule. Like it was never meant to be fair. It was never meant to be any of the things anybody's talking about these days. And what people are currently trying to do, I think, is trying to rewrite the story of how life works, which is a fair thing to do, right? Like, if the game is a game you don't want to play, then you want to rewrite the rules of it. You want to rewrite the regulations of it. You want to change the laws such that they match what you think fair would be. The problem is that, like, in order to play that game, you have to play the game where you break America. You have to. Like, you have to understand that in order to change every rule and everything about America that you think is unfair, unrighteous, awkward, ugly, you have to actually just delete America. Which means you're deleting the country in the world where everybody earns more than almost anybody else in the world. Like, the average American earns more than 2/3 of the people on the planet. Like, not the average, the poorest person in America earns more than 2/3 of the people on the planet, but facts don't help you. You guys want to just bleh. You want to say and make it so, right? Like, you want to be like fucking, what's his name on the goddamn, the Next Generation, make it so, right? Like, so we're all living in a story. We're not living in the truth. We're not living in reality. We're living in a story, right? And that story requires that we assume that everybody who came before us built something ugly, disgusting, and awkward because we're failing in it. But the truth is, you're not failing in it. You're not, right? Like I said, poorest homeless person in America has more money than most people on the planet. Extreme poverty is described as like $12,000 a year, right? If you've survived in America in the last 4 years with this fucking inflation, I promise you have eaten and gotten more than $12,000 a year. So, because like even the smallest combo at Burger King costs like $12, $14, whatever it is. So, what I want to do tonight is I want to talk about something different. I want to talk about trying to approach the idea of developing a story that sounds true for all of us, right? So once upon a time, in every culture in the world, they wrote a story of Noah's Ark, right? Not Noah, right, in every culture, but there was a flood, the Great Flood, right? And inevitably, a couple of people survive in the story, and then humanity grows from it. And that's worldwide. It doesn't matter if you're in South America or if you're in Easter Asia or whatever. I've said this before, right? And I've theorized that perhaps the ark that Noah built, because he'd never built anything in his fucking life, wasn't an ark like a boat that could carry two of this, two of that, two of that, two of that, two of that. I've theorized, and perhaps I've said it before on this channel, that it's about an ARC, an arc, right? Like a story arc, right? Just like there's an Ark of the Covenant, the Ark of the Covenant of God's contract with men, right? And perhaps from time to time the story needs to be updated. It needs to be adjusted. It needs to be made more truthful and honest about how we are, and incorporate the lessons we've learned since the last time the ark was updated, because there is an ark, right? Like, and that probably sounds crazy because in this world, like, the word of God is not allowed to change. It's not, right? Like all the rules say, right? The problem is that doesn't kind of add up, because the Old Testament is built off of cities rising and falling, right? Like civilizations, whatever you want to call them, right? It's about moments in time and hard lessons learned, and painful lessons generally, right? And as such, it was understood once upon a time that from time to time the Word of God would require updating. But then Christianity and Islam hit, and we suddenly acted like we were outside of the past. We were separate from that the story never needed updating again. It never needed to be adjusted. We never needed to add to it or reframe it or anything, right? And I think that that's a failure of Western civilization. It's a failure of Eastern culture, is that, no, those are the books we go off of. No, those are the only books we go off of. Like, we don't have a methodology to add Shakespeare to the religious Bible, right? And a Bible, literally the word Bible means library. And the Bible is a library. It's a highly compressed document. It was the first version, as far as we know in Western culture, of compression, of a compression algorithm, right? When you read the Bible over and over, and as you grow in this world and you live out life, what you find is that, like, these small 7-line stories about Cain and Abel become like, they expand, they're less like a transparency, and what happens is that your framework of your experiences and your memories blow out, and suddenly that story has more and more significance, like Shrek, right? Like Shrek, he's like, I'm like an onion with layers, right? Like, it's like that, right? And language is a compression scheme. I speak to you, and I'm trying to speak to you all of my thoughts in a small form fashion. It gets brought back in, and then it goes to you, and then you and you and you and you and you and you and you, and then it goes back out, and then each one of you is going to explode it out however you explode it out. And hopefully, if I'm a highly effective communicator, it'll have a deeper meaning, right? So, like, language is a compression algorithm. That's why the Bible is actually a whole library. We didn't need a library of Alexandria anymore, because we actually had the Bible. We had the Old Testament. We had New Testament. We had Islam. We had the Quran, right? Like, we had books, and it didn't need to be compressed anymore in such a way. Sort of like how once upon a time storage was a real problem in building computers, right? like so, and memory was a real problem. So what they would have to do is build really elegant programs that were very, very small, and that's how in the 80s they were able to make Super Mario Brothers, which is a biblical story. Like, it's literally a reflection of it, even though it was made by Japanese developers who highly likely did not have much understanding of Christianity. They managed to make a story of a fool. He falls into a world. The first Super Mario Brothers game, he falls into a world. And he's a fool there, right? And what is he confronted by? Well, he's confronted by mushrooms that can kill him, which is what a monkey would be faced with out in the environment. It's like you're hungry, you're starving, you don't know what to eat. Some of these mushrooms will kill you. But he's also confronted with mushrooms that will give him extra life, right? And those are the psychoactive mushrooms, right? So those are like psilocybin and stuff and such. And he eats those mushrooms and he gets an extra life inside of the life he has, right? Like he can die right here and then be rebuilt again, reformed exactly as he was, but more prepared because he already knows what's coming. And then there's stars, right? And throughout history, men have looked to the stars, and suddenly there's like an invincibility attached to that, is to understand the cosmos is like, it's a greater life than the life of agriculture, for example. Like, there's nothing wrong with farming, there's nothing wrong with being a carpenter, nothing wrong with being a plumber. Those are amazing things. Those are how you stay bonded to this reality. And yet when you look to the star, you feel invincible. When you look to the universe, when you look beyond us, and that's what the star represents in Super Mario Brothers. And then there's flowers, and if you have those flowers, you can spit fire from your fucking mouth. Like, if you go back to the original Super Mario game, it's not from his hands, it's from his mouth. And that is representative of the, when Jesus comes back in the Bible, a sword will come from his mouth, right? Like, that's the symbology there, right? And intrinsic in the story of the original Super Mario Brothers game is there are warps, right? Like, if you know what you're doing in the world, if you're a good plumber, you understand where all the pipes go. If you understand where all the pipes go, you can go to the end of the story and defeat the boss without ever getting wet. And that's weird, right? Like, because there are underwater levels, right? And you can just get there with and skip all the drama and bullshit if you understand the nature of if you're a good plumber, right? But this plumber, Mario, carries a fucking hammer, not a wrench, not a pipe wrench like a fucking plumber would. He carries a hammer like a carpenter would. And so that's sort of how Super Mario lays out before us, and that's just one story. Like, our whole world is filled with these fucking stories that teach us things, right? And if the story happens over and over, you can roughly assume that there's something inherently true about it for all humans, just like the flood myth. And what happens in the second level? Level 1-2, well, 1-1, Super Mario's he's a fool. He doesn't know how this world works. He's just a 30-year-old man, 33-year-old man dropped into this world, and he doesn't know how it works. And he goes to the first level, and he's like, oh, cool. And he gets the flag, and he's like, I got this shit, right? And then what happens? He gets dropped into the underworld. He takes a warp. And he's in the fucking underworld, right? He's fucking literally every Greek character that had to go to the underworld. He's Jesus after his crucifixion, right? Like a man who thought if he just did and said the right things, it would all turn out okay, was murdered by the world. And so he's dropped into hell because the world fucking murdered him, because it doesn't matter how good you are in a world full of snakes, right? And that's the world of Mario, but it's also the world of men. And so he gets dropped into the underworld, but if you know how to fucking play it, you can go right from there all the way to the end of the game. So you go from being a fool to being a hero very quickly if you understand what you're doing, if you know the game you're playing, right? If you know the story you're in. And that's weird, right? Like, it's very weird, but it also seems to be true. Like, scientists sit and calculate with numbers that are, all numbers are an abstraction, right? They're an abstraction from reality, because really any two apples are not the same. They're not the same apple, right? So you can't add this apple and that apple and make two, because actually you're making two sets of individual apples. You add them together, and now you have two sets of two unique apples, and that's just 1 and 1. And that's weird, right? Like, but we do it for simplicity's sake. But sometimes simplicity isn't the same thing as elegance. Elegance is something that's efficient and true and also simple, right? And that's how our stories become true, right? And when I look out over a world of people who are arguing about every little thing down to the minutia of what the fuck your body parts are for, and what you were born for, all I can conclude is that there's something wrong in the story we're telling, right? Because the value of our stories is that they tell us to be better. They tell us that we can be better, that we have the capability to grow and learn, and that yes, we're all born as fools, but we can die as wise men, and when we die, we can have saved the princess, right? And the princess is the daughter of the king. And the king is the man who once laid the world straight for us, who built the world that the snakes took over. That Bowser doesn't live in a castle that fucking other reptiles built. He lives in a castle that men built. Just like the people who live in the White House right now didn't build that fucking thing. They just found a way to take it over. And it's the job of good men, good fools, to figure out how to traverse this world in such a fashion that we can lay the world straight once again. And some part of me is screaming that the best way to do that is to find the right story. Because if we had the right story, we wouldn't be fighting. When a civilization or a city or a country or a nation or a world has the right story, then everybody can go, I have a place here. That this world needs me. And suicide rates drop, birth rates increase, and so on and so forth, right? But what happens when we have the wrong story is that tyranny increases. You land up becoming ruled by words that aren't true. That the fastest pace you can go down a road is 30 miles an hour. But that's an arbitrary, abstract number. And perhaps you're capable of handling going 40 and never killing anybody. Maybe you're capable of going 60 and never killing anybody. That is literally the definition of the Olympics, right? We know that there are superhuman people who, if you place limitations on them, you would make them miserable. You would kill their fucking soul, right? And we live in a world where you're afraid to talk to your phone in a video, because if you post it online, then maybe you'll lose your job, or maybe you won't be able to get a job. Where the moment you leave your house, you're presented with signs: pick up after your dog, 15 miles an hour, stop sign, fucking crosswalk, da 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 da, and you're just surrounded by signs telling you what to fucking do, because the tyranny is rising, right? In our society, in the world, in general. When we don't have the story, we require laws and rules to guide people. But when we have the proper story, then the signs are built within you. And so you care about your neighbor enough to not drive fast through a residential neighborhood. You don't need signs. And by the way, when a society or a civilization has more rules than it can possibly enforce, of course they will be enforced unequally. And that leads to further unfairness, right? And nobody knows how to fix that. And the only guess I have right now, tonight, is that we have the wrong story about how reality works. We have the wrong story about how we work. We have the wrong story about how we can work together. We have the wrong story. But what I know very little. Because to know something is to really know something. To really know something is to not be the rat inside of the maze, right? And that's what humans are. If the universe is a simulation, if God rules us, if the universe has a consciousness and we are separate from that somehow, if we are in the experiment, then we're just a rat in the maze, and what can we know, really, except where the walls are, where we absolutely can't go. So I know very little. But what I do know is that I haven't seen the best of you, and that the best of you is yet to come, and I look forward to meeting you. Yeah. Look to your stories, folks. The stories that really fucking sing to your soul. If there's a book you've read 10 times, if there's a movie you've watched 100 or 20 or 2, or you just can't help but to watch it, like, try to figure out why that story is calling to you. Try to figure out why you can watch Jurassic Park over and over and over and over, like my sister-in-law can, or my daughter spent a year watching Cinderella almost every day, like, and so I know more about that story than any fucking human being should. But the point is that there is something in it. If you've watched it and you've never watched it enough, you didn't learn what you were supposed to learn from it. And our stories matter. And your story matters, and my story matters, and everybody's story matters, because what we can do is begin to build a Bible that integrates all of humanity within it. We can begin to build a library of stories that builds upon the foundations. You don't kick out the fucking legs of the table and destroy the world to make it new when you don't know what the fuck you're doing. We don't know where ideas come from. We don't know how consciousness works. There's a fucking trillion things humanity, scientists, math, religion, none of them have been able to explain to you. And I see these kids out there, and they're trying to kick the fucking legs out from under humanity. And the legs are our foundations, they're our pillars. The Old Testament, New Testament, Quran, fucking science, Shakespeare, literature, art, da-da-da. These are the foundations that got us this far, and what you're trying to do is not erase the past, you're trying to erase time itself, and the time is inculcated into every single thing you see. There was sacrifices made to make your stupid phone charger that barely works. Like, thousands and millions of years it took to get to the point where you have an oven in your house, and all you want to do is make no-bake cookies, and literally every person in history would dream to be able to have baked cookies in their house. Stop trying to delete the time before us. Start asking yourself what you're doing with the time you're in. I get it. I get how hard it is to forgive the past, because it hurt you. It hurt me. It hurts all of us. And if it was in the future, then we can at least prepare for it. But it's in the past, and it hurt. And I get that. But you're not trying to solve for a race. You're not trying to solve for a gender. You're not trying to solve for a town, a city, a club. You're trying to solve for the world. And if your answer to solving for the world requires deleting one person from it, you have the wrong answer. And that hurts, right? Because evil exists, and there are people who have just given over their whole lives to evil. But I've never met an evil person who didn't believe in their heart of hearts that they were the good guy. And so a place that we can meet those evil people is in a story. We can say, okay, what happens if you get what you want? What happens if I get what I want? Who gets hurt? Who gets harmed? Da, 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 da. Okay, and then you can begin to calculate using the math that we've developed who has the better plan, right? And then you have to add in morality, and morality is hard, right? Because in a very real way, Morality defies logic because people in the CIA, the NSA, certain people in government will tell you that who cares if 3,000 people over here died because we got our national security. I do. You do. And they should. Sometimes increased risk isn't the same thing as absolute loss. And so maybe murder, coup d'etat, whatever you want to call it, is always evil. Like what? We live at increased risk because these 3,000 people are alive. Like, okay, who said reality was safe? Who said it was fair? Who said it was fun? And who said we had the authority? I didn't build you, you didn't build me, and yet there are people out there who think it's okay to kill me. And I don't think it's okay to kill them. Because that's not the game, that's not the story we should be telling. If you want the world to be a better place, you're not gonna get it by burning fucking dead people. You're not gonna get it by manufacturing viruses in labs. You're not gonna get it by changing the head of state, like, because you can't hide the truth. Because you hide it enough, and what happens is that, say, an encryption algorithm on your Wi-Fi, right? Is that at a certain point, your Wi-Fi is encrypted, but at a certain point, you've passed enough data through it that literally any teenager could hack your Wi-Fi. Like, and then it's all open season. Because if you communicate, you're exposing yourself. You're opening yourself to the world. Every time you communicate, it doesn't matter if it's on the internet or in person, what you're doing is you're exposing yourself to ridicule, to hatred, to maltreatment, to judgment, whether righteous or unrighteous. You're opening yourself. And the gift of humanity is that you can always say, okay, so kill me. All I'm doing is talking. But the moment y'all go out there and you start pushing people around, telling people what they can say by way of gun, and it doesn't matter if you have a gun in your hands, if you got a fist in your fucking palm, which you do, that's by way of gun. One punch in the right place and you're all dead. Nobody's immune to that. And so I get tired of, explaining it. I get tired of trying to figure out how to explain it. I'm not an optimist by nature. But the problem for me is that I've seen how bad it gets. I've seen how bad it's been. I've lived in the dark places of this world as best as I could from my wonderful status as an American. And so I've lived at rock bottom way longer than I ever needed to by way of my income, but something drew me there. Something drew me into the dark corners of this world to find out how it really is. And what I saw when I went to the dark places was good people. It didn't matter what hood I was in. It didn't matter what color their skin was, what language they spoke. I found good people everywhere I went. And so I guess, it made me an optimist. The best of you.